You are walking through a dream. You believe you are awake. You believe the choices you make are your own. You believe that the ballot box determines the fate of nations, and that the history books on your shelf contain the truth of how we arrived at this moment. But what if I told you that the reality you perceive is merely a thin veneer, a stage curtain pulled tight over a machinery so vast, so ancient, and so terrifyingly complex that to see it clearly would be to shatter your sanity? We call this the land of the free. We speak of liberty as if it were oxygen, abundant and natural. But freedom is an illusion. It is a carefully constructed cage where the bars are invisible, forged not of iron, but of debt, dogma, and distraction. Beneath the surface of our celebrated democracy, beneath the marble columns of Washington and the glass towers of Wall Street, there pulses a dark, rhythmic heartbeat. It is the pulse of a leviathan that has been swimming in the deep waters of history for thousands of years. This is not a story of random chaos or political incompetence. This is the chronicle of a deliberate, cold, and calculating invasion. This is the story of how the Illuminati did not just infiltrate the United States of America. They built it, they own it, and they are steering it toward a destination that was mapped out before the first stone of the Great Pyramid was ever laid. To understand the present, we must violently rip away the comfort of the modern world and transport ourselves back to a moment of pivot, a hinge in history where the door to the future was kicked open by men lurking in the shadows. The year is 1932. The world is trembling. The Great Depression has hollowed out the economies of the West. In Germany, a failed artist is screaming from beer halls, mesmerizing the desperate. In America, bread lines snake around city blocks like lines of ants. But while the masses starve and weep, in a secluded, opulent chamber that exists beyond the reach of the press and the public eye, a different kind of meeting is taking place. The air is thick with the smoke of expensive tobacco and the heavier copper scent of bloodlines that date back to the priest-kings of Babylon. Here sits the International Secret Council of Nine. They are the invisible architects, the confederation of initiates. They do not answer to presidents. Presidents answer to them. And in this year of chaos, they issue a directive that will change the course of human consciousness forever. Imagine the hand of the Comte de Saint-Vincent, the master of this council, drafting a document that is classified beyond top secret. This is not a military order for the movement of troops. It is a spiritual command for the movement of souls. The letter is addressed to the Order of the Rosicrucians, an organization that presents itself to the public as a benign fraternity of mystics and seekers. But the letter strips away the mask. This is the new dispensation, the text reads, the ink drying on a plan that will enslave the mind of the West under the guise of liberating it. The work of the spiritual and mystical fraternities must be re-established throughout the world. Listen closely to the cold precision of their intent. They command that the Rosicrucians must select the method of the pre-Christian Essene order, the very order in which Jesus was trained. They are told to accept all students who apply, to turn no one away. Why? Because the harvest is ready. The Council of Nine knows that a population in despair is a population ready to be molded. They are not looking for the elite anymore. They are looking for the masses. They are casting a net so wide that it will drag the entire collective consciousness of America into their esoteric fold. This document from 1932 is the smoking gun. It reveals that the Rosicrucians, often dismissed as eccentric philosophers, were and are a direct arm of the Illuminati. They are the recruitment center. They are the intake valve for a machine designed to strip a human being of their individuality and replace it with the will of the master. The text explicitly states that this organization was chosen because it is the oldest in America. Let that sink in. Before the Constitution, before the Declaration of Independence, the Rosicrucians were planting their seeds in the fertile soil of the New World. They claim a false origin story, speaking of a mythical Christian Rosenkreuz, but this is merely a fable for the uninitiated. The truth is far darker. The Rosicrucians were created by the Illuminati as a front, a beautiful mystical spiderweb designed to catch the curious, the spiritual, and the lost. And once caught, the process of illumination begins, not a path to God, but a path to absolute submission to the hierarchy. But to truly grasp the scale of this conspiracy, we cannot stop at 1932. We must descend further into the abyss of time, back to the very cradle of civilization, where this fire was first stolen. The Illuminati are not a modern invention. They are the inheritors of a dark flame that was lit in the ziggurats of Chaldea and the temples of Saba. Dr. Pascal Beverly Randolph, a man who dared to investigate this order when the 1932 text was written, pulled back the veil on their lineage. He traced them back to the Magi of old, the sorcerer priests who founded the Semitic civilizations. He named their initiates, Brahma, Buddha, Zoroaster, the Gnostics, and the Essenes. He describes a fountain of light, a source of inner enlightenment that reveals the reality of existence. This sounds beautiful, does it not? It sounds like the spiritual awakening we all crave. But beware the light that blinds rather than guides. The term Illuminati itself is derived from this specific concept: the inner illumination, the direct connection to a cosmic intelligence. But here lies the trap. These ancient adepts discovered the significance of fire, not just the combustion that cooks food, but the transcendent light of the mind. They claimed that all theology, all philosophy, all psychology originated with them. And because they believe they possess the source code of human existence, they believe they have the divine right to rewrite it. They look upon the uninitiated, the common man, you and I, as cattle, as sleepers, as negatives who block the flow of their great work. They believe they have the right to rule the world because they possess the light, and we dwell in darkness. This is the ultimate arrogance. It is a God complex weaponized into a political ideology. They do not want to govern us. They want to transform us. They want to burn away our individuality in the furnace of their universal improvement. The methods they prescribed in that secret 1932 mandate were chillingly specific. They referenced the Essenes, the Gnostic Jews who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the texts that were purged from the Bible. The Illuminati claim that Jesus himself was an Essene, trained in these secret schools, a bearer of the light. But the Illuminati twisted these ancient esoteric truths. Over thousands of years, the thirst for power corrupted the quest for wisdom. They turned to the dark side of these truths. They realized that if you can control a man's spiritual beliefs, you own him completely. A man will resist attacks, he will fight a law, but he will die for a belief he thinks is his own. The genius of the Illuminati is that they do not force you to obey. They manipulate you until you desire to obey. They use the methods of the ancient mysteries, rhythmic chants, meditation, the breaking down of the ego, to empty the vessel of the human mind so it can be filled with the cosmic spirit. But this spirit is not God. It is the collective will of the Council of Nine. Consider the terrifying implication of the universal agent mentioned in their texts. The Rosicrucians speak of a potent force known to the ancients, a force that, if controlled, could revolutionize the world. They describe it as a way to send a thought in an instant around the world, to heal or slay at a distance. This is not science fiction. This is the occult technology of the elite. They believe they can manipulate the equilibrium of the world through focused will. And in the chaos leading up to World War II, they decided it was time to use this force on a global scale. They were done hiding in the crypts. They were ready to step onto the stage of geopolitics. The Second World War was not just a battle over borders and resources. It was a ritual. It was a mass initiation ceremony designed to traumatize humanity, to break the old order of empires and monarchies, and to pave the way for a new world order where the United Nations would rise from the ashes like a phoenix. And they were not choosy about their soldiers. The 1932 Directive commanded the Rosicrucians to accept everyone. Instruction on an absolutely free will basis, they claimed. But free will is the first casualty of the lodge. As the initiate climbs the degrees, as he learns the secrets, he is slowly detached from his family, his country, and his own moral compass. He is taught that the universal improvement justifies any cost. He becomes a cell in a global organism, an ant doing the bidding of a queen he will never see. This is how they built their army, not with conscription, but with seduction. They offered meaning to a generation lost in the Depression. They offered power to the powerless. And in exchange, they took the soul of the West. As the storm clouds of the 1930s gathered, a new wave of messiahs and gurus was launched upon the American public, softening the ground for the takeover. They used the media, the universities, and the corporate boardrooms to spread a new gospel. It was a gospel that sounded like peace, but meant control. It was a gospel that promised unity, but demanded uniformity. And at the center of it all, pulling the strings of the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, and the politicians, sat the invisible masters, the hierarchy of light, the Council of Nine. They watched as the world burned, knowing that from the fire they would forge a new weapon, a weapon called the United States of America, not as a beacon of hope, but as the enforcement arm of a global empire. The trap was set, the door was closing, and the people of the world were walking straight into it, eyes wide open, blinded by the very light they were told would save them. To understand how a cage is built around a civilization, one must not look at the iron bars, but at the hand that feeds the prisoner. By the mid-1920s, the American mind was a fertile, desperate landscape, parched by the vacuous materialism of the Roaring Twenties, and soon to be shattered by the Great Depression. It was into this psychological vacuum that the Illuminati launched their spiritual air raid. They did not send soldiers, they sent mystics. They did not send politicians, they sent painters and poets. In 1925, a new messiah stepped off the boat and onto the docks of New York City. His name was Nicholas Roerich. To the uninitiated, he was a Russian artist, a philosopher, a man of culture who had been adored in the salons of Europe and the frozen steppes of Russia. But Nicholas Roerich was not merely a painter of Himalayan landscapes. He was a vector. He was a chosen vessel of the Confederation of Initiates, sent to inject a specific virus into the bloodstream of the American elite. Roerich moved through the high society of the East Coast like a phantom, charming the wealthy and the powerful with talk of a new era. This was the buzzword, the hook, the gleaming bait. He established the Corona Mundi, the Core Earth, an organization ostensibly dedicated to art and culture. But beneath the velvet ropes and the gallery openings, the Corona Mundi was a recruitment center for the New World Order. Roerich preached an ideology that sounded intoxicatingly sweet to a generation drifting away from the rigid dogmas of the Church. He taught that the willpower within the human being was the divine essence, the answer to all suffering. He spoke of mighty approaching energies and the dawn of a new civilization created by the fire within us all. The sheep listened. They gathered in ballrooms and lecture halls, eyes wide, swallowing the poison because it tasted like nectar. They believed they were joining a movement of peace and enlightenment. They did not see the wolf smiling behind the beard. They did not realize that Roerich's new era was simply a rebranding of the ancient plan for total domination, where the illuminated would rule and the rest would serve. This is the genius of their method. They do not demand submission. They engineer consent. The purpose of this system, propagated by Roerich and the theosophists like Madame Blavatsky, was to strip away the individualism of the follower. It is a psychological flaying. The initiate is told to listen only to the cosmic spirit and to ignore his own reason. Through rhythmic sounds, hypnotic music, and the repetition of phrases, techniques used in cults, Masonic lodges, and churches for millennia, the mind is washed clean. The personality is withdrawn from the physical body until the man recognizes himself not as a free agent, but as a fragment of the master's consciousness. He is broken and rebuilt. He becomes a shell, a hollow reed through which the wind of the Illuminati blows. In their own cold internal documents, the masters admit that they are only interested in a man from the point of view of his usefulness. The initiate cares not if he loses friends, relations, or children. He works in the dark, conscious of little result, a blind servant to a cause he is not permitted to understand. But who are these masters? Who sits at the top of this pyramid of broken souls? We are not speaking of politicians or bankers, but of the shadows behind them. The Theosophists and Rosicrucians called them the hierarchy of light, or the elder brothers. They are the unseen hands that guide the destinies of continents. Beneath the Council of Nine, there are the 7 masters of the Great White Lodge. They have no public faces. They operate through codes and whispers. Their names are whispered in the inner sanctums: Jupiter, Moria, Kuthumi. One of them, we are told, was educated at a British university, a man of immense intellect, charged with revitalizing ancient philosophies to enslave the modern mind. Their aim is absolute and terrifyingly simple: to ensure that the head of every government, every military, and every organization of power is ruled by a master, or at least by a puppet whose strings are held by one. Their ultimate goal is a world of peace, yes, but it is the peace of the graveyard, a peace where all human minds have succumbed to the will of the light. By the late 1920s, the stage was set. The actors were in place. The script had been written. And the masters decided it was time for the anarchy before the creation. They explicitly predicted that the mid-1930s would be the time of the great work. They wrote of material stress and strain, the wrecking of old political parties, and the overthrowing of trade relations. Does this sound familiar? The Great Depression was not an accidental market correction. It was a controlled demolition. It was a global ritual of scarcity designed to break the spirit of the independent nations. It caused mayhem and political upheaval exactly as planned. And from the ashes of this economic apocalypse, they birthed the radical political parties that would drive the world into the slaughterhouse. None was more significant or more manipulated than the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany. We are taught that Adolf Hitler was a madman who hijacked a nation. But the truth is far more sinister. Hitler was founded, funded, and sent on his way by the very same forces that were preaching light and peace in the drawing rooms of New York. The delirious madness that possessed the German nation was an engineered psychosis. The Nazis adopted the very language of the Illuminati. They spoke of a master race, a twisted reflection of the masters of wisdom. They told the German people that man was not a creation of God, but a vessel for the cosmic spirit, mirroring the teachings of the secret societies. The German army was turned into a machine, invincible and terrifying, honed by 6 years of hard training and the fires of the Spanish Civil War. But they were just the hammer. The hand swinging the hammer was hidden in the shadows. Why? Why burn Europe to the ground? Why slaughter millions? Because the Illuminati needed to demonstrate the necessity of international dependence. They needed to force the nations of the world to realize that isolation and national sovereignty were dangerous. They needed to destroy the concept of the nation-state so they could replace it with a supranational government. After the first rehearsal of World War I, they created the League of Nations. It was a group of countries desperate to avoid another war. But it was created by the same secretive group of international business leaders and mystics who had fomented the conflict in the first place. But the League failed. It was too weak. It did not have the teeth to bind the world together. So the masters decided that the lesson needed to be repeated, louder, bloodier, and more traumatic. Phase 2 began in the 1930s. The experiments were underway. In a chilling admission, one of the 9 masters stated that experiments are being made now, that people in many civilized countries are under supervision. They were stimulating the masses, intensifying the pressure, observing the reaction like scientists watching rats in a maze. They were watching America, Australia, India, Russia, Scotland, and Greece. They were planting their schools, their initiates, their scholars, workers, politicians, scientists, and educational leaders to color the world with their ideology. The goal was to create a global environment where the true occult school could emerge into the light of day. And what of the United States, the so-called land of the free? While Europe descended into the abyss of fascism, America sat back, grew in power, and waited. The political parties in the U.S. were almost incidental. Democrats, Republicans, it didn't matter. The country was in the teenage years of true capitalism, controlled not by the ballot box, but by business. And the business leaders, the Rockefellers, the Fords, the Carnegies, were already deep within the web of the Masonic brotherhoods. They chose the politicians. They controlled the Congress. Most of the politicians were Masons anyway, brothers of the lodge, sworn to oaths they held higher than the Constitution. The Masons were directly under the influence of the masters. The chain of command was complete. The fate of the world was sealed. The United States was the designated New World for a reason. It was not just a geographic discovery. It was a spiritual project. It was the place from which the New World Order would be launched. The old world of Europe, with its stubborn monarchies and deep-rooted Catholic traditions, had to be shattered. The power had to shift to the enlightened minds of the United States. The Illuminati watched as the anarchy they set in motion tore the world apart. They watched the rise of the swastika. They watched the burning of books and the marching of boots. And they waited for the perfect moment to jump in, to bring the might of American industrial power to bear, and to emerge as the saviors of a world they had helped to destroy. The plan was precise. The prophecy was mathematical. They even predicted the dates. The improvements in the political and economic order were seen crystallizing between 1933 and 1945. 1933, the year Hitler took power. 1945, the year the war ended and the New World faith began. This was not history happening by chance. This was a ritual performed on the body of humanity. As the smoke cleared over Hiroshima and the rubble of Berlin, the weary world sighed, "Never again." And in that moment of exhaustion and trauma, the trap snapped shut. The United Nations was formed. The disparate world was forced to join together at the same table. The anarchy was over. The creation had begun. And the masters of the Great White Lodge, invisible and untouched, looked down upon their work and saw that it was good. But the war for the body was only the beginning. The war for the mind was about to enter its most terrifying phase. The smoke of the Second World War had barely drifted from the ruins of Europe when the trap, set centuries prior, finally snapped shut with a metallic finality that the world mistook for the ringing of church bells. It was 1945. The globe was exhausted. Nations lay in rubble, their spines broken, their treasuries empty, their populations traumatized by the horrors of the camps and the atom bomb. In this vacuum of hope, in this desperate silence where humanity whispered, "Never again," the masters stepped forward with the solution they had engineered the problem to create. They presented the United Nations. To the weary public, it looked like a shield against future tyranny. But to the initiated, it was the capstone being placed upon the pyramid. In a few short years, a disparate, chaotic world of sovereign nations had been herded like cattle to the same table, forced to drink from the same cup of internationalism. It was unprecedented in human history. It was predicted in their texts. It was planned in their lodges. They had even circled the date, 1945, decades in advance, as the year the New World faith would take shape. The chaos of the war was merely the birthing pains of their New World Order. And where was the headquarters of this new order? Not in the old, blood-soaked capitals of Europe, but in the New World. The United States of America was not named the New World by accident. It was a designation of destiny. It was the tabula rasa, the blank slate upon which the Illuminati would write the constitution of a global empire. The old world of monarchies and popes was to be left behind, discarded like a snake shedding dead skin, so that the enlightened minds of the United States could rise. This plan was not drafted in the 1940s. It was sewn into the very fabric of the American flag. Look closely at the dollar bill in your pocket. Feel the texture of the paper, the smell of the ink. It is a talisman of the occult. How did it happen that a nation supposedly founded by Puritans and Christians, a land of the gospel, ended up with the Great Pyramid of Giza stamped on its Great Seal? Why does the all-seeing eye of Horus stare back at you from the currency of a republic? It is because the United States was tasked with a specific mission: to reinstate the rule of the light, the Illuminati definition of light, on Earth. The pyramid is not just a shape. It is a hierarchy. The many at the bottom, the few at the top, and the separated floating capstone of the invisible masters who watch it all. This invasion of the American soul did not begin with World War II. It began before the ink was dry on the Declaration of Independence. We are told the story of the American Revolution as a tale of plucky farmers fighting against the tyranny of a king. But pull back the curtain and you see a different play. An American High Mason and Rosicrucian admitted in 1877 that the United States was freed from England by the action of secret societies, more than is commonly imagined. The men in power on both sides of the Atlantic, the generals, the politicians, the financiers, were often brothers of the same lodges. They held the same degrees. They swore the same blood oaths. There are accounts of meetings held between political enemies, brothers of the craft, meeting in secret even as their armies slaughtered each other on the battlefields. The war was a stage, a theatrical production written in blood to birth a new nation that would serve as the host body for the parasite. By 1785, the infection was visible to those who knew where to look. The first official Illuminati lodge, the Columbia Lodge, was established in New York. Its roster reads like a genealogy of American power. Governor Clinton, the editor of the New York Times, and the early ancestors of the Roosevelt clan. They were planting the seeds of dynasty. A year later, in 1786, the virus spread south to Virginia, where a lodge was founded with Thomas Jefferson as a member. Within 3 years, 14 more lodges had sprouted across the 13 states like poisonous mushrooms after a rain. This was not a club for gentlemen. It was a network of subversion. And the men who built the country began to panic. Imagine the atmosphere in 1789. The French Revolution is exploding across the ocean. Heads are rolling into baskets. The streets of Paris are running with blood in the name of liberty, equality, fraternity, the slogan of the lodges. In America, the president of Harvard University issues a terrifying warning, his voice shaking with the gravity of the threat. He warns that the Illuminati are gaining influence in politics and religion, that they are undermining the very foundations of the young republic. At the exact same time, agents of the French Illuminati arrived on American shores to water the seeds they had planted. The fear was palpable. George Washington, the father of the nation, a Mason himself, was terrified. He did not dismiss these claims as conspiracy theories. He wrote in his own hand that he was fully satisfied that the doctrines of the Illuminati and the principles of Jacobinism had spread in the United States. He feared it would shake the government to its foundations. Washington and John Adams, two of the most powerful men in history, were lobbying Congress, begging them to protect the United States from this conspiracy. Think about that. The first presidents were not part of the conspiracy. They were fighting it, and they were losing. The battle for the soul of America reached a fever pitch in 1798. In Charleston, South Carolina, the Reverend Jedediah Morse stood in his pulpit, the candlelight flickering against the shadows of the church, and delivered a sermon that sounded like a declaration of war. He told his congregation that the civil and ecclesiastical establishments of Europe had already been shaken to dust by this terrible organization. He traced the horrors of the French Revolution directly to their machinations. He warned that the Jacobins, the radical revolutionaries, were nothing more than the open manifestation of the hidden system of the Illuminati, and that they were now at work in America. "I hold it a duty," he thundered, "to declare to you these truths. My only aim is to awaken you." This was the Paul Revere ride of the spiritual war, a desperate cry to a sleeping nation. In the hallowed halls of Yale University, the president echoed this dread. He asked a chilling question that cuts through the centuries. Shall our sons become the disciples of Voltaire, or our daughters the concubines of the Illuminati? This was not rhetoric. This was a fear that the moral fabric of the nation was being dissolved by a cult that worshipped reason over God and power over morality. And at the center of this storm stood Thomas Jefferson, a member of the Virginia Lodge, a man of the Enlightenment. Jefferson was accused by his peers of helping the Illuminati infiltrate the New England Masonic lodges. The divide was not just political, it was metaphysical. The intrigue deepened in 1807, when John Adams, the former president, sat down to write 3 letters to a Masonic brother. In these letters, he poured out his heart, complaining that Thomas Jefferson was using the lodges for Illuminati purposes, twisting the craft to serve a dark agenda. But you will not find these letters in the Library of Congress. You will not find them in the history books. They were stolen. They vanished. History is not just what is written. It is what is erased. Adams also wrote to Washington, warning him that the lodges were being used for satanic worship. These were not the ramblings of madmen. These were the private correspondences of the men who built the Western world, whispering to each other that their creation had been hijacked. Rumors swirled around Benjamin Franklin, the man who spent years in the salons of Paris, dabbling in the occult circles of Europe. But the hatred was focused on Jefferson, whom Reverend Morse branded an Illuminatus. The tension was so high that by 1812, the president of Harvard gave another speech, stating there was sufficient evidence that societies of the Illuminati had been established in the land of gospel light. He warned that they were secretly striving to undermine all ancient institutions, seeking the ruin of the Republic. Should infidelity generally prevail, he prophesied, our independence would fall. Our Republican government would be annihilated. And then fire came to Washington. We are taught that the War of 1812 was a dispute over maritime rights and trade. But consider the timing. Consider the target. In 1812, the British forces marched on Washington, D.C. They did not just occupy the city, they burned it. They targeted the government buildings. Why? There is a theory, buried deep in the archives of the forbidden history, that the British attack was an orchestrated purge. They attacked to destroy vital documents, papers that revealed the extent of the Illuminati influence on the government and the war. Fire is the ultimate censor. It cleanses the record. When the smoke cleared, the evidence was ash, and the narrative could be rewritten. By 1829, the takeover was evolving. The British Illuminati were sending agents to New York to give speeches. Francis Wright, a fierce orator for the Women's Auxiliary of the Illuminati, spoke openly of free love and atheism. She spoke of an international secret movement working behind the scenes to foment future wars, to create chaos so that a one-world agenda could be imposed. She called them the communists before communism. She revealed the playbook: create mayhem, create suffering, and then emerge as the savior. Communism, wrote the poet Heinrich Heine in 1843, is the secret name of this tremendous adversary, the dark hero cast for an enormous, if fleeting, role in the modern tragedy. While Francis Wright was mesmerizing the crowds, the real work was happening in the back rooms of the newspapers. The editors of the New York Tribune and the New York Sun were working with the Rothschilds on a secret Illuminati committee. They were shaping public opinion, deciding what the American people should know and what they should fear. In 1841, a man named Clinton Roosevelt wrote a book. In it, he outlined plans for a New Deal and a National Recovery Act. Does that sound familiar? It should. These were the exact names of the policies that Franklin D. Roosevelt would implement 100 years later. This is the scale of their planning. They do not think in election cycles. They think in centuries. They map out the economic enslavement of a nation 100 years before the chains are even forged. The Illuminati set up front organizations like the Loco-Foco Party in 1835, using it to influence other parties and inject socialist ideals into the American bloodstream. They were patient. They were relentless. From the drafting of the Constitution to the structure of the political parties, their influence was immense. They built the stage, they wrote the script, and they cast the actors. And while we argued over left versus right, over Democrat versus Whig, the masters sat in the shadows, watching their geometry of control take shape in the streets of Washington, D.C., where the very layout of the roads forms the symbols of their power. The newly formed United States was not a bastion of freedom against the old world. It was the chrysalis, and the thing growing inside it, fed by the blood of revolutions and the ink of stolen letters, was getting ready to spread its wings and cover the entire world in its shadow. The mystics had done their work. Now it was time for the financiers and the politicians to close the net. We often comfort ourselves with the idea that monsters belong to the past. We look at the burning of the Library of Alexandria or the Inquisition chambers of the Dark Ages, and we tell ourselves that we have evolved. We live in the age of information, of democracy, of transparency. But what if I told you that the monsters didn't die? They just put on suits. They traded their robes for Italian silk and their altars for mahogany boardroom tables. The mystical cults of the ancient world did not vanish. They corporatized. The Jacobin clubs that fueled the fires of the French Revolution did not dissolve. They simply rebranded. Today you know them by names that sound boring, bureaucratic, and benign. The Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the United Nations. These are not debating societies, They are the engine rooms of the Leviathan. They are the direct descendants of the Bavarian Illuminati, a lineage of control that has morphed from a secret order into a public administration, hiding in plain sight behind the dull gray veil of diplomacy. If you want to see the face of this modern Hydra, you do not need to look for a hooded figure in a catacomb. You need only look at the family tree of one dynasty, the Rockefellers. This family is not just wealthy. They are the high priests of the modern capital. David Rockefeller did not just participate in the world stage, he built the stage. He founded the Trilateral Commission. He co-founded the Council on Foreign Relations. The family's history reads like an Illuminati greatest hits album. Through the work of this single bloodline, a grand unification was engineered. They realized that you cannot rule the world with armies alone. Armies are expensive and messy. It is far more efficient to rule the world through debt, energy, and the standardization of thought. The United Nations appears to be a chaotic assembly of squabbling nations, but the delegates who sit in those chairs owe their positions to the various branches of this worldwide network. They are actors hitting their marks, reciting lines written by the invisible masters, performing the theater of sovereignty while the walls of the global prison are quietly erected around them. But there is an inner sanctum even more exclusive than the UN. Travel with me back to May 1954. The location is Oosterbeek, Netherlands. The venue is the Hotel de Bilderberg. The air is thick with the scent of pine and the nervous energy of men who own the world. This is the birth of the Bilderberg Group. It was sold as a private conference to foster understanding between Europe and America. But the funding came from the CIA. The organizer was Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, a man with deep ties to the old royal bloodlines and the corporate power of Shell Oil. In these smoke-filled rooms, away from the prying eyes of the press, the future of humanity is negotiated like a merger. Presidents are vetted before they are elected. Wars are discussed before they are declared. They created the European Union here. They planned the centralization of the world economy here. In the United States, there is a group called the American Friends of the Bilderbergers. Who chooses them? You don't. They are chosen by the hidden hand. In a democracy, we are told that power flows from the people. But in the real world, power flows from the Bilderbergers down to the politicians, who then act out the charade of asking for your vote. The next time you stand in a voting booth, staring at the ballot, ask yourself, why does it feel like a choice between two brands of the same detergent? Left or right? Democrat or Republican? It does not matter. The Illuminati understood a long time ago that to win the game, you must control both sides of the board. They throw up congressmen and senators like a ventriloquist throws his voice. They created a system of fakery they call democracy. The political parties are merely pressure valves designed to release the anger of the masses without changing the structure of power. It is a psychological cage. As the revolutionary writer Maurice Joly wrote in 1864, the goal is to dazzle the public, to stun them with movement and noise, so they never see the chains being forged. But to truly understand the nature of this beast, we must strip away the politics and look into the eyes of the entity itself. We must go back further than 1776, further than 1932. We must return to the shining ones. The history of the Illuminati is not just a history of governments. It is a history of the human mind being hacked. The origins stretch back thousands of years to the mysterious cults of Syria, Egypt, and ancient Sumeria. These ancient adepts, the Essene, the Sons of Light, discovered a profound secret. The human mind is programmable. They learned that through the use of specific rhythmic sounds, drugs, meditation, and trauma, they could trip the light fantastic. They could induce states of consciousness where the subject feels a connection to a universal mind. But here is the tragedy. Along the way, greed and the lust for dominion corrupted this knowledge. They turned the light to the dark side. They realized that if you can induce this state in a person, you can bypass their critical faculties. You can implant thoughts. You can erase identity. You can create a Manchurian candidate or a compliant population. They used this knowledge to bring down royal dynasties, to orchestrate the French and Russian revolutions, and to create the anarchy of the 20th century. They are the shining ones, not because they are holy, but because they possess the fire of knowledge that they withhold from the rest of us. They view themselves as the shepherds, and we are the sheep to be sheared, milked, and occasionally slaughtered when the cosmic spirit demands a sacrifice. Today, their control is absolute. They do not just own the banks, they own the culture. They control the fashion you wear, the food you eat, the technology in your pocket. They have created a reality that feels like a dystopian science fiction movie, only it is not fiction. They have rewritten history, twisted the narratives of revolutions, and sanitized the blood from their hands. They have created a world where you believe you are free because you can choose between 50 channels of propaganda. But the truth is, you are living in a construct designed by an ancient, massive secret society that has been playing with mankind for centuries. They are the enigma. They are the invisible masters. And they have taken the United States, the New World, and turned it into the engine of their final design. The journey we have taken from the Tower of Babel to the Council of Nine, from the blood-soaked trenches of Europe to the marble halls of the United Nations, leads to one inescapable conclusion. The New World Order is not coming. It is here. It is the air you breathe. It is the algorithm that feeds you. It is the debt that binds you. The Illuminati is not a group of men in a room. It is a system of reality that has been overlaid upon the natural world. The final countdown has begun. The question is no longer, who are they? We know who they are. The question is, now that you see the strings, now that the curtain has been ripped down, what are you going to do? We stand at the precipice. The story of the Illuminati is the story of humanity's stolen birthright. We were meant to be sovereign. We were meant to be free. But we traded our freedom for security. We traded our spiritual independence for the comfort of the Master's voice. The masquerade is over. The shining ones are revealed as the architects of our despair. And as you sit there, listening to this, remember, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled wasn't convincing the world he didn't exist. It was convincing the world that the cage he built was actually a playground. We have spent this entire journey looking up, at the elites, the secret councils, the Rockefellers, and the invisible masters. We have pointed fingers at the them who control the us. But here is the haunting realization that turns the entire conspiracy on its head. The Illuminati did not conquer us with force. They conquered us with consent. The twist is not that there is a secret group ruling the world. The twist is that the Illuminati is a mirror. Every time we chose convenience over liberty, Every time we chose a comforting lie over a hard truth. Every time we looked for a savior politician to fix our lives instead of fixing them ourselves, we signed the contract. The master can only exist if there is a willing slave. They didn't steal our power. We handed it to them because the burden of true sovereignty was too heavy for us to carry. The New World Order isn't a prison they built for us. It's a fortress we begged them to build to protect us from the chaos of being truly free. This leads to the most uncomfortable question of your life. It is not a question of politics, but of the soul. We are standing at the fork in the road of human evolution. Do you choose the blue pill of the Illuminati, a perfectly ordered, safe, and numb existence where your choices are made for you by the shining ones? Or do you choose the red pill of the chaos, a dangerous, unpredictable, and terrifying freedom where you alone are responsible for your destiny? Most people claim they want freedom, but they secretly crave the cage. Which one are you? If you are ready to stop being a spectator in the theater of the masters and start writing your own script, then you need to prepare for what comes next. The age of secrecy is ending, and the age of revelation is beginning. Subscribe, not to join a channel, but to join the resistance against the sleep. The next chapter isn't about history, it's about the future of your own mind. Wake up.